Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. I'm Sarah. I lead the customer success team at Great Question, and so excited that you're all here today to be joined by me and a good friend of mine, Jesse from ServiceNow. Let's go through a couple quick housekeeping things, and then we'll dig into the meat of this while you're all here during your lunch hour, your morning coffee break. Today's topic is one that I know that most of you have wrestled with, at least the customers that I work with at Great Question certainly do. How do we share research insights in a way that they actually stick and drive broader business decisions to drive that impact and see the ROI of all that fabulous work your researchers are doing? To help us unpack this, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jesse Livingston, who leads the research communications team at ServiceNow, the big software company a couple of you might have heard of. He started as an orchestra conductor, became a UX researcher, and has stopped at LinkedIn, Netflix, and Microsoft along the way. But today, I'm super excited to get a behind the scenes look from Jesse on how he brings structure, emotion, and timing to insight communication, all of which are so important to having impactful communications so you can apply this framework to your own research practice. A quick note before we start. We're already in the chat. We are partying. This is a research party, everybody. But please do throw your questions in here. My colleague Carly is going to throw those into a document for me to moderate all along the way. We'll also save some time for Q&A at the end, but Jesse and I want this to be super interactive. So please feel free to hop in when you can, and I'll do my best to serve them up to Jesse for an easy layup. And I think that's all the housekeeping things. But Jesse, hi, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. It's great to be here, Sarah. Thanks
Amazing.
for having me.
That's awesome. And so your role right now is a research communications manager. That's not something that I frequently have heard of, even after being here at Great Question, working directly with researchers, helping with the end-to-end research process for the past 3.5+ years. I've never heard of this role before. Can you tell us a bit more about it and how you support the research team at ServiceNow?
Yeah, happy to. It is a super unique role. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, research communications, like that's a thing. And even when I tell people about it now, they're like, oh, wait, what exactly do you do? And what's interesting about it is like we talk so much about research communications and how important it is, but this is still really uncommon. Like people don't like put someone in a role to actually own it. So that's
Yeah.
something that's pretty cool about the leadership at ServiceNow is they were like, hey, this is important and we should really do something about it and have somebody own that. So it's super unique. A little bit about what it is. It's basically split between two sides of research communication. One is internally, all the normal stuff that everybody does, how we share research insights with our colleagues. So that means communication principles, coaching, workshops, and resources to help our team, 140 research team, huge team,
Wow.
communicate with our colleagues. The other half, which is in many ways the thing that prompted the role, was communicating externally. That means communicating insights to customers that participated in research. And so what that is about is we want customers who participate in research to feel that their time was valuable. And we're going to get to a little bit more in detail, I think, on this one point in particular, but this is basically sharing back with participants what we learned from them and the difference that it made. So it's kind of the two sides of what I do.
That's incredible. And so, as a bit of an aside, I started my career as a storyteller as well. I was a journalist, then got into customer success because I love talking to people like this and helping them tell stories in a way that drives those business outcomes and those decisions. And so you have a really interesting background as well, starting as an orchestra conductor. How has that influenced how you tell those stories about those research insights and share those with your team?
Yeah, so like for I don't know, maybe a decade, like you said, I was a orchestra conductor, started off as a trumpet player and then did conducting. And I think what that did, once I transitioned into user research, was it focused me on the importance of performing.
Mm,
So music, in many ways, it doesn't exist without performance. So it's not like a painting. It's not like a sculpture. It doesn't just have some kind of existence on its own. It must be performed. And I say that because our insights in many ways are the same way. They're
Hmm.
not like a design or code that kind of just is there. They're insights, and they don't really kind of exist, or at least don't make any difference until they're performed or communicated. And so partly I wanted to hit on this because it's what's so important, I think, before we get into the nitty gritty is a lot of people think about storytelling and research communication as like a nice skill to develop. Like, hey,
Right.
once I get a little bit further along as a researcher, I'm going to start to think about communication. And I would say start with communication. In many ways, like communication has to be like the nucleus of research, because without that, we cannot make a difference. So it's not something you do later on. It's something that you start with. And conducting really kind of focused me on that performing or communicating aspect of research right at the start.
That's incredible. And you mentioned a couple really interesting things there. And I hear this question very frequently from the customers we work with. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Great Question is a research tool. We help with prototype testing, interviews, all the full gamut of methods, but also with generating those insights. And you mentioned something really critical there in my mind, Jesse, which is the importance of communicating upward. And so getting research in front of executives.
Mm,
But the approach kind of goes beyond that, and it starts with telling those stories. Can you talk about the importance of sharing insights across teams with the participants you just mentioned, which I find really interesting and would love to double click on that in a little bit,
mm.
our customers, and why that broader communication matters just as much.
Yeah. Well, I think for us at ServiceNow in particular, it's very hard for us to find participants because so many of our products are so niche. So
Right.
one thing we kind of realized was like, hey, well, what's in it for the participant, right? Beyond just the incentive, what's in it for them? And they want to know what we learned from them and what we're doing about it. So was my time really valuable? I think participant relationships that are really transactional aren't great. you know, uh, we kind of treat participants like research subjects. We extract what we
Mhm.
need, give you your money, and send you on your way. And in a way, there's a way that can be kind of dehumanizing, right? Which is a
Yep.
little bit of a weird contradiction of our focus on human-centered design. So in many ways, our kind of close the loop communication, trying to tell participants, here's what we learned from you, here's what we're doing, is a way of kind of humanizing the process a little bit. So we're doing that um, through blogs, through podcasts, or maybe just communicating directly with your participants. Hey, here's kind of the top 3 to 4 insights that we learned from our study, and then maybe later down the line we can tell them what we did with that.
And I think that's brilliant because something I hear all the time as well is especially for a niche audience, and there are so many of the customers I work with that that's the case. It's so important to maintain that relationship. So it's not even just the communication that's important, it's relationship building with those participants so they keep coming back and you have that healthy panel. I'm going to do a spur of the moment little aside here. Look at the results from this poll, Jesse. We see
Oh
who
yeah.
you primarily share your research with. I am thrilled that a third of you guys said multiple or all of the above. You're communicating your research to all of these different stakeholders, which is a beautiful thing. And then, but tied with that is only to product and design teams. Um,
Mm,
how important is it, Jesse, do you think, to broaden the communication beyond that single group and
mm.
get it beyond the product and design team to feel that more pervasive business impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's
Ah,
incredibly important to think about, yeah, beyond kind of the immediate teams that you might work with. I think the crucial point there is just making sure you're thinking about what the implications are for each of these people groups, right? So a lot of times, research, I think research shareouts try to do too many things at once. They try to kind of cover all of those different audiences in one thing. And so something we've been
yeah.
playing with a little bit is like, could you have, you might not even consider it a share out, but smaller conversations with different groups of people to kind of tailor it to those audiences because they're all going to care about different
Mm,
things. But like, yeah, I mean, if you're communicating, let's say you're talking to a PM and their job is to make this feature work, If you tell them, hey, people aren't finding value in the feature, we should redirect the roadmap, that might not be the right person to tell that. You probably need to tell that to the GPM or someone who is in charge of changing the roadmap. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of friction because they're like, well, I'm not actually writing the roadmap. I'm supposed to make this feature work. That's not really going to land. So all that to say is I think it's crucial to know how your insights really, how the impact of your insights is going to actually change based on who you're sharing it to.
I love that. And in a minute, we're going to talk about your framework, Jesse. And I think this will be a great segue into that because one of those elements, a little sneak preview, y'all, one of those elements is being targeted in your approach to research communications. But before we get there, my friend Clark, how are you? It's been a minute since we last spoke, but Clark has a fantastic question here for the group, a bunch of plus ones on it. What does sharing out insights with customers look like from a compliance standpoint? Asking for a friend, they're the friend. But this is a really important one that I see all the time, which is like, how do opt-in rules and permissions actually come into this, especially in our GDPR security world? Do you have a great answer to that great question?
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That is, yes, very, very important. Yeah, I have some legal partners that I've been working with to try to answer that question is, yeah, what can you share and what's the right, and not even like what is compliant, but how much, how do we want these insights shared on a LinkedIn post, and like what would happen if that happens? I think
Yeah.
the short answer is like, it's really important, obviously, to be like, well, first is the important thing is to tell the people you're sharing with that you heard them. It's not that you need to be complete and thorough and give this kind of big shebang like you might in a normal share out. So all that to say is like I typically have our researchers focus on more broad foundational insights and nothing that's going to talk about business strategies, future business strategies. It can depend on the group you're talking to. So we have product advisory councils where they are under much stricter NDAs than like even our research participants are. And our product managers will openly share roadmap details and product, business decisions. They'll do all of that. So we can share more, for example, with that group because they have a stricter NDA. But I do everything needs to go under kind of some legal review, and we're working on like legal guidelines for our team, but it is something that's really important to think about.
Wonderful.
So,
Great answer, Jesse. Thank you. Clark, if you've
mhm.
got any follow-ups, throw them in the chat, please. But I appreciate that, Jesse.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty familiar with ServiceNow since you guys work with Great Question, but talk to me about the split of roles and responsibilities here. For those of our friends joining us that are also part of a larger research team, does the focus on research communication make you rethink the role of the researcher or the
Hmm.
responsibilities?
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit in this Medium article that we're going to share later, but I think the first step is realizing that great research communication actually isn't about communication at all.
Mm.
It's not about frameworks or guides or templates. It actually starts with a shift in how you think of your role or our roles as researchers. And that I think, many of us think our job is to discover insights, to educate our partners, but it's not. It's to inspire action. Okay? It's
Mm.
to make change. And of course, we teach to make change, but the teaching isn't the end goal, in my opinion. So I heard a design leader say, not someone at ServiceNow, but a design leader say, the research report has no business value. The decisions made from the report do. And,
Mm.
and that's why I think the first step is seeing your role as a change bringer and not just an educator or someone who's discovering insights. And once that shift happens of I'm here to make a difference, to influence a change, everything tends to fall into line, I think, after that.
This is the perfect time to start bringing in that framework. I know you literally just said it's not all about frameworks, but I think what you just
Yeah.
mentioned, what you
Yeah.
just mentioned as well
Yeah.
about being an agent of change, not just a
Sure.
storyteller or report writer, is so important here. And so let's talk about at least the guidelines or the framework that you've got in
Hmm.
place to drive that change. Talk to me a little bit about those four pillars and how they came about.
Yeah, I mean, they came about through a bunch of conversations with internal stakeholders where I just tried to get a sense for what communication's working, what's not. And kind of at the end of that, I came up with these kind of 4 principles: distilled, dramatic, targeted, and timely. And I can kind of briefly touch on each of those. So,
Great.
and they're in a specific order, right? So we start with distilled, clear the noise, right? No one can hear anything important you have to say when there's noise.
Mhm.
Dramatic, inspire action, right? Don't just communicate information. You need to highlight the right things that actually up the stakes, that increase the drama. And that's really important because we don't often think of that in research communication. I think we're going to hit on that in a minute, but dramatic is one of our principles. Targeted. Okay, so you've distilled your insights. They're nice and dramatic, but who do you send them to? Targeting the right people, and it's a lot simpler in many ways than people think. It's literally just about saying, who is the person that can influence the decision that I want? So it takes some work to figure out who those people are, but it's literally about tell the right person, tell the person who can actually make the change you want to see. And then timely. So tell them at the right time. Tell them at a time that makes sense based on when that decision is going to happen. And I think for me, a lot of this comes together. I think of like any normal circumstance where you want to make something happen. Like imagine you're at the dinner table at Thanksgiving and you need the salt. Well, you're going to find where the salt is. You're going to see whose the salt is near, and you're just going to tell them, hey, Dad, could you pass the salt? Right? So you were distilled, you were direct, you maybe weren't dramatic, like, Dad, I'm dying, I can't eat anymore without my salt. You weren't maybe that dramatic, but you were targeted, you told the right person, and you didn't tell your dad when he was out in the bathroom. You told him when he was sitting there. So that's what I mean when I say that knowing that you're here to make change, just everything falls into place. Like you wouldn't even think twice about that when you're at the dinner table. And I think we need to bring more of that kind of common sense sort of logic into how we communicate insights. And that's kind of how it all fits together.
Amazing. I love that. If it was Canadian Thanksgiving, there'd be a lot more sorries thrown in there. I just got to say at the Thanksgiving table if we were looking for the salt. But
That's
um,
right.
I
Yeah.
also, as someone who's worked with a lot of executives, it's also about like that targeted element, I think is really important as well. I know
Mm,
we're going to dig into more of the dramatics, but it's the medium and the message, right?
yeah.
And
Right.
so you're not going to send a 30-page report to a CEO. You're going to send maybe a highlight reel that you created out of a great question or something along those
Yes.
lines to make the most impact.
Absolutely.
The Let's dig into the dramatic element in this. What kind of impact have you seen from I'm trying to look for like the amount of dramatic impact
Yeah.
from the
Sure.
communications you've had at ServiceNow.
Yeah.
Um, Not just from the research team, but also in helping teams build that trust throughout the organization to take action on the insights that you're surfacing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the dramatic pillar it's important for me to highlight because it's one that we don't talk about a lot. And in many ways, it challenges a core assumption, again, thinking about how we see ourselves as researchers, a core assumption about ourselves that we're supposed to be unbiased, objective. And so you might hear dramatic and go like, dramatic, like that does not sound like the way a researcher is supposed to be. And so I think the notion of being objective has been the death of many, many research reports because objective has come to mean dispassionate, disengaged, like speaking from the outside, and that doesn't move somebody. You are informed by data, right? But just because you're informed by data and that's driving doesn't mean it's not dramatic, doesn't mean it's dispassionate. You're telling a story to make a change. And so specifically the two elements that are what I mean when I say dramatic are number one, tell them why the research mattered. Okay, most researchers don't do this. We go right into the what. We just keep talking about all the things we found, the information, but we don't say like, hey, 80% of customers downloaded X feature, but only 30% of them are using it after 30 days. Here's why. If you tell that to a business leader, they are going to pay attention. So you're getting their attention straight out the gate. You can't impact any change if someone's not paying attention to you. So the first part of dramatic is tell them why it mattered. Hey, this part of our business is suffering. Hey, people are leaving our product by these percentages, and here's the cause. And then you go into why, right? And then the last part is you got to tell them what to do, right? Most people that I talk to, especially executives, are like, spoon feed me the insights. Tell me simply and plainly what you want me to do with it, right? Which means we need to be a little bit more prescriptive than maybe we're typically comfortable with. But those two elements, tell them why it mattered, tell them what to do, are super important for the drama, or at least how I'm defining drama in this context.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the tactics as opposed to the strategy here for a hot second. What's the process for taking something dense and turning it
Mm.
into something that is actually persuasive and consumable is the word I'm going to
Yeah,
use in this case.
sure. Yeah, I think the main thing I try to tell people to do is to try to isolate what is like the main point you're trying to make. What's the headline? If this were a New York Times article, what would your headline be? A lot of researchers will have a ton of different information, a lot of information, all of which could have different headlines, but there's no kind of unifying idea or point you're trying to make. And without that big idea, it's very, very hard to stay focused, to keep like driving that one point, to keep that in the fore. So specifically, something you can do that I've done with people are start with start with trying to summarize your research report in maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs, like long form. Then try to do it in like 3 to 4 sentences, and then try to do it in one sentence. And what you're getting there is forcing yourself to do those different layers of information. You're making yourself distill things down into a big idea. And what that does also mean is it means you might need to leave some things out that don't actually align with the main point you're going to say. Like I did a research report on this like big international study at LinkedIn on the communications between hiring managers and job seekers. And there was so much we found. And I had that analysis panic of like, it's never going to make sense. It's all just going to be complicated, disconnected information. But I had to pick in the end one story that I wanted to tell, or at least I chose to. And I think that makes it a lot more effective for taking a dense report and actually turning it into something compelling. It's what's that headline?
Gotcha. That's
Yeah.
awesome. In journalism, we call it a nut graph. I hear my CEO ask for the bottom line all the time. However it is, you got to get to the heart of the matter so that you can capture that attention and keep it throughout the entire
Mm.
artifact, right? And so
Hmm.
speaking about artifacts, are there any specific formats you found especially persuasive?
Mm.
I know you're talking about targeted and we're talking about mediums for those stories, but are there any formats you found especially effective, especially in transitioning to a more consumable or dramatic flair for surfacing those insights?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about that. I honestly don't know that the format matters a ton. Like I think that I've seen the same format work really well with really good distilled and dramatic content, and the same format will work really badly without that. So I think that, obviously you want to think about you do need to think about audience, right? Like when we're thinking about executive communications, we're obviously going to do something much more concise, much more like on the one pager side.
Yeah.
And that's part of just tailoring things. But um, I think what I try to get people to focus on is your content distilled and dramatic? Is it a distilled insight that can inspire action? And whether that's kind of in a Slack message or in a slide deck or a one pager or a video, I don't know that it matters a ton. I think all of those can be effective, when filled with kind of the right fuel, so to speak.
Awesome. Thank you. And
Yeah.
so there's a little bit of chatter in the chat here, Jesse,
Yeah.
that I think might be timely at this juncture. Oh, we
Mm.
got the results here. Pretty much what we would have expected. Slide decks for that quick
Mm-hmm.
hit storytelling, the one pager for short and sweet, easy to consume. I am personally a little bit surprised the video walkthroughs weren't higher up there.
Mm.
But I think what's more compelling right now is a bit of the discourse happening in the chat, which is around the balance between staying unbiased while also capturing the attention and being able to communicate those research findings. So I
Mm,
think Brenna's question here kind of encapsulates some of this back and forth. Brenna's saying her boss pushes back hard, and hi Brenna, it's good to see you. My boss pushes back hard on any recommendations I make and says I need to stay out of the solution space.
hmm.
What's a way to do this? And so, what that kind of speaks to is Bryce's point as well about the intent to stay dispassionate and objective, reporting the world as it is.
Mm.
So, what is that balance there? How do you strike that between Brenna's issue, where we shouldn't be recommending solutions, but also making sure that the most valuable insights are conveyed appropriately?
Yeah, great question. A couple things to unpack. I think, when you think about like staying out of the solutions space, I think maybe a first step towards that could be to work with the partners that the insights are relevant to work on those solutions. So you're meeting with design and saying, "Hey, here's kind of what we found. Let's come up with the solutions together." I would never say a researcher should stay out of the solution space, though. I mean, the whole point is that something happens with it. And the most common thing I hear from partners is like, I don't know what to do with this. Right. So they want that, like they want that direction. That doesn't mean you need to be the expert on design, engineering, product strategy, business strategy. No, that's why I say doing it in partnership with these people can actually be really important. Because like, let's say you come to, product and design and your GPMs and you're like, we want design to do this. And design's like, you never talked to us about that. So it's important to work with those people on those recommendations because they are the experts in their product space. So maybe that's what
Right.
your manager is getting at is like, hey, you're not the expert in the engineering space or the product strategy space. Like that's the domain of your PM, but work with them to come up with that recommendation or that solution. So that's what I would say on like the solution space. But I think on the unbiased one is the one I'm really interested in. My research director at LinkedIn, Julie Norvisis, she works at Dscout now. Amazing, amazing leader. I owe so much to Julie. She always told us no one is unbiased. Everybody has bias. We are all human. Every piece of information that comes into our head is being filtered and interpreted through a myriad of experiences and impressions and whatnot. Everybody has that. So I think we need to start with just admitting to ourselves we all have bias, and that's okay. Bias doesn't need to be evil or bad. It just means that you have a reaction as a human being to the data that you're getting. Now, obviously, we need to have checks and balances. We need to have other people say, like, hey, I'm not kind of seeing that, right? We know all the different areas in research where like the bias of like the first thing you heard is the thing that you're going to tend to believe is the pervasive insight, and that's not necessarily true. So we need to have those checks and balances, but at the end of the day you still have to make a decision on what is the story or insight I'm going to choose to put forward here, right? So for example, when I did that study on hiring managers and job seekers, one insight that came through is how powerless job seekers feel in the hiring process, that the power imbalance is greatly weighted in favor of the recruiter. That was there. And I decided that that felt like the one that I wanted to focus on. There was no right area to focus. There were other things I could have focused on. So maybe it's also just kind of saying that like there isn't like one right thing to focus on. There's just what you choose to focus on, maybe for a particular audience. Maybe you'll focus on something different for a different audience. But that's what I would say, I think.
Amazing. I love
Yeah.
that. And there's a little bit of conversation in the chat as well around using AI and other tools to kind of expedite that artifact creation process. I think
Hmm.
that's fabulous, Jesse, in terms of how do we stay quote unquote unbiased. I think now more than ever we all feel the need to appear objective so that we can be perceived in the way that we intend to be perceived. And so
Mhm.
AI.
Yeah.
This is a whole can of worms that I am not going to open up too keenly today because we talk about bias, AI. That's a whole
Yeah.
other webinar. But in terms of creating these artifacts, making it easier to create these share outs that'll be most impactful. I know for me in particular, our customers use our highlight reels all the time to create video artifacts in like in minutes of different unmoderated and moderated functionality. What else have you seen successful in kind of being able to quickly like input the long report and spit out the Slack
Mm.
message or the one pager? Anything that you could recommend here for our friends?
Definitely. There's a lot of ways that I use AI and we use AI too, in the writing of the insights. That's the thing I'm more involved in. I'm less involved in like, I haven't used it for creating video content or those sorts of things myself personally. But couple ways. Number one is one of the things, I talk about is being able to communicate your insights in plain, direct, normal language. So a lot of us use researchy business jargon that really can convolute your insights. It makes it hard to understand. And one of the ways that we actually help with that, because it can take a long time as a writer to develop this, is being able to rewrite some of your insights. I will use, just off the top of my head, any kind of prompt like rewrite this in plain, direct language, rewrite this in simple, normal language. A lot of times we think that our partners, because they speak in jargon, we need to as well, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. You will never ostracize somebody by speaking plainly and clearly. That will always be a better way to communicate. And so we use AI for that too. I'll paste in an insight and use any one of those prompts I just mentioned. A lot of them will be effective. And it goes a long way to just being able to say something in just, again, the cognitive dissonance, or not the cognitive dissonance, cognitive load of having to parse through a super jargon heavy insight is massive.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one way we've used it. I also will use it to, so generating these different, like the email or the Slack message, very helpful, right? If you're like, hey, write a 2 to 3 sentence email or 2 to 3 sentence Slack update using these insights, paste in as the starting point. You just obviously, please make sure it's all correct. Like we know about AI hallucinations and all those challenges there. So, but the good thing is you're the expert on the information, so you will know if it's correct or not. But yeah, using it to generate those summaries or even extracting like the most important insights for me, like from another person's deck. Right. So I get reports all the time of like super complicated product studies that I don't know a lot about. And I will use that to help kind of pull out things that I might want to communicate to an executive or a leadership audience or something like that. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Love that. Are you currently using AI to support your research communication? Poll results, yes, regularly, 58%. I would love to hear from the no and not interested folks in the crowd in the chat and hear why not.
Yeah.
Of course, like there's a big AI push across the industry for those of us who work at the tooling companies in particular to make sure that we're helping you guys be as efficient as possible. So if you've got thoughts on why you're not interested, please throw them in the chat because we'd love to learn from you so that we can help you guys as much as possible. Just catching up on the chat here. Okay,
Yeah.
we've got those questions stored. I think this might also answer Maggie's question, which is for those of us who haven't done this before. So maybe you're a smaller team, not 140 researchers, but maybe just you, or a smaller team that is democratized. Maybe you don't have a researcher on staff and you're doing this as a PM or designer. Where do you start doing
Mm.
this? Like, what's the first step you should be doing to start conveying those research insights throughout the organization or doing so better in maybe a more structured way? What's step
Hmm.
one that you would recommend here?
Yeah, I think step one is do your own user research study on how you're communicating to your stakeholders. Right? Schedule meetings with them, schedule 30-minute meetings, and literally construct a discussion guide. Like if you had a PM that came to you and said, we want to understand how well research is being communicated in the org, could you come up with a study for us to do that? I'm serious. Like that's kind of how I approach things when I first got to ServiceNow is I try to get a wide range of an audience and asking them things like, when's the last time you felt like a research insight really landed? Tell me more about that. Or when's, I had the advantage of I wasn't the researcher that was communicating these, so they could feel a little bit more, I think, comfortable to be frank with me about that. But nevertheless, I think that's super important because, it's possible every situation in every organization and team is going to be a little different. You might find that there's one particular area that's lacking in your particular team, and so doing that kind of I don't know, doing a kind of ad hoc study like that will really, I think, be illuminating for what kinds of things are people paying attention to, what sort of artifacts are landing or not, right? It's really just kind of using our own methods to our benefit. Like we don't do this a lot, like do a heuristic analysis on your own slide deck and look at how many, like what slides is there too much cognitive load? What slides are they not sure where they are in the narrative, right? There are so many
Yeah.
tools that we have that we use for the benefit of our products that we don't use for our own benefit. So I would say, first of all, start there. But then the next thing is kind of going back to that. I know you only asked for the first thing, but one more thing I think to really think about is going back to kind of the beginning, the point at the beginning of the point of this is to make a difference, right? The point of this is actually not to over focus on communication and actually focus on the difference you're making. And if you made a difference, then it was effective. So it's kind of like looking at the lens of communication through just impact. Like, hey, how many research insights did people actually act on? And why, if they didn't, like, why not? And the more you start to kind of tune into that and just think of yourself and act like, hey, I'm a strategic decision influencer. How's that going? And not just an information communicator. I think that'll go a really long way into just figuring out what those areas that you're communicating well, what areas you need to improve. And so that's kind of where I would start.
Love that. Thank you.
Mhm.
I heard from a couple of our friends who are more on the not using AI as much side. And I love this because Bryce, it sounds like you're more focused on ensuring that you can continue to develop your skill set as a research storyteller and a research communicator, which is beautiful. And Sharon said we want to avoid becoming lazy with ChatGPT, and holy moly, do I relate to that? Like the speed at which I
Yes.
can write customer emails and decks is
Yes.
insane with ChatGPT. Um, I think it's an interesting point there, though, that no one brought up the bias. I was expecting the first thing to be the hallucinations and the bias that comes with analyzing through AI, which is, I just wanted to call that out. It's really interesting that that's not number one on the list, where last year, if we were doing this webinar last year, I bet you that would be number one on the list. Um, Last question for me, then I'm going to go back to the questions from the audience. And as Carly just posted in the chat, guys, I've got one more question, then it's over to you. So please throw anything that you've got for Jesse in the chat right meow so that we have time to answer before we're full up on the hour. My last question for you, Jesse, then I'll moderate for us is if there's one habit or mindset shift you'd want every researcher to adopt when it comes to insight sharing, what would it be? In other words, what's the bottom line here?
Yeah. I think the bottom line is you are here to inspire action. That is it. Communication that inspires action is good communication. I mean, unless you're doing it under, you're threatening people. In that case, no, that's not the way you should inspire action. But really, I mean, it really is. I think it goes back to that initial point is, if you leave with nothing else, it is your goal is to make change. And when you start doing that, go back to that dinner table, Thanksgiving dinner analogy. We instinctively know the kinds of things we do to make changes in whatever it might be. We identify what needs to change, we go to the source of that, and we do the things necessary to kind of move that change along. Now, that being said, obviously you are an influencer, right? You are not the one making the decisions. You are the one who is influencing the decisions. But I would say that's the one thing I would have everyone leave with is you are here to make change. So don't focus so much on the information and the communication and the format. First and foremost, just remember that overall goal is to influence something, make some sort of impact in your businesses.
Love that. Thank you. All right. Over to our crowdsourced questions. I think this was back towards the beginning of our discussion, but Bryce asked, I just knocked over my Kindle and scared the dog, so I apologize if he starts
Didn't
barking.
hear it.
Okay. Might a PM feel like you jumped over them when going to communicate to the higher ups? So what I'm interpreting here is maybe it's researcher assisted research with a PM or designer, or you've delivered the insights to them and then you go to communicate it up another level.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you're doing this while still protecting your relationships internally is kind of how I'd interpret this one, Jesse. Bryce, correct me in the chat if I got that wrong. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I saw that one. I was like, yeah, that's a really good question. Super important to keep all that in mind as you're communicating. And I think just even that question kind of shows that you're thinking about the receptivity of how all this is going to work. Um, you, so I think if you were to go, um, if you were to have first communicated these insights, because this is actually a real story. My very first project at LinkedIn was on our product, our referrals product. It was not doing well, but you could refer a connection to a job, is what it was. And yeah, the PM kind of wanted to, had some feature and design changes. And I, scoped half of the study to be foundational questions about like, why do people make referrals in general? What does it take? What are the conditions in which they're comfortable to make a referral? And what happened was basically, yeah, we found that it's so hard to make a referral. There are so many barriers that it makes it really unlikely that they're going to do this on LinkedIn. Now, in my case, that this actually just happened not because of any brilliant politicking or communication on my end. The PM and the GPM just happened to be in the share out. The GPM was there already. Okay, so if future Jesse could talk to past Jesse, I would have told him, hey, just make sure if there's an insight that is a roadmap level decision, make sure the people who are influence those decisions are there, right? I think that there's nothing kind of weird or off about that. I mean, I think if you were to communicate that to your PM and they were like, no, I don't think that's the direction, and then you kind of went to the higher up, yeah, that's that's going to cause some friction. But you could start by saying, hey, there's some decisions or insights here that I think will be really relevant for some of the business decisions or roadmap decisions. Who are the right people to invite to this PM? So now they're a part of it. Now they're actually a part of it. And if they're worth their salt, they're going to care about that. Like they're going to care about, like, nobody who's actually really trying to do their job with any integrity is going to want to be working on a feature that might be kind of dead in the water. So I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but just make sure the right people are there at the start and work with them to kind of do that.
Yeah, getting buy-in from the outset is so important if you're going to be able to impact at the other end of the project. Love that. Thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, you're
Over to
welcome.
Maggie. Maggie's question here. How do you handle a situation where your research communications can't be used right away? And by this, they're saying implemented right away. So part of the
Ah.
reason is due to staffing changes at the org she works with, along with potential cuts to federal programs. So shared some really valuable insights, can't be implemented right now. What do I do?
Great question. Well, there's always going to be those kinds of constraints. And first, the fact that you even know all that is great. Like you're already thinking about the constraints, the business constraints that are keeping your insights from being implemented. A lot of researchers don't necessarily think like that. They'll kind of do the share out and then move on. I used to do that, right? And so the fact that you know what those are, super important. I think in that case, what I would say is stay in touch with when those constraints are not constraints anymore, right? So check in every 2 to 3 months. Hey, like I wanted to check in, like here's a couple, these insights, we couldn't implement because of X, Y, and Z changes. I wanted to check in and see kind of where we're at. And, has anything changed? It can, I wouldn't want your insights to feel like a, ball and chain that's like always following you. You got to keep following up every 2 to 3 months or something, because it may be hard to remember as you're taking on new studies and whatnot. But I would say, yeah, obviously, if there's nothing that can be implemented because of actual like engineering or budget cuts or whatnot, constraints in that sense, of course, like then hold them somewhere in the back pocket or the back burner, but just kind of check in every now and again, I would say, and see how you can nudge them along. But that's a good example of we aren't the ones actually making the changes. And so there are going to be situations like that where, yeah, like you can't change that. You can impress upon the people how important those changes are. Like when I was working on LinkedIn Talent Insights, some of the insights around data quality that I pushed on the team resulted in them hiring more data scientists.
Hmm.
And so you can, if you make enough of a case, that can help move some of those constraints along, or make those constraints not as, not blockers anymore, I would say. So
Great. Thanks, Jesse. And that goes into, I'm going to skip down a couple here, Carly, since you're helping me surface these, but this is related to a question that Natasha asked. So back to use case suggestions and what research-backed insights are implemented and which stay on the back burner is what you were just referring to. Why me
yeah.
with this one? What do you use for tracking and follow-up?
um, so I don't use a lot of things for tracking and follow up for this kind of thing. It's funny. This is a slight rabbit trail, but have you all heard of Erica Hall? She's an amazing consultant researcher. She wrote a lot of books on research, active on LinkedIn. I adore her because she's always calling people's bluff. When I was at Microsoft, she came in for a fireside chat and someone asked like a similar question of like, hey, what tools do you, she talked a lot about like mapping the business, like mapping how the business makes money. And they're like, what tools do you use to do that? She goes, like a pad of paper and pencil, a bar napkin. She was very like low tech. So for me, I just this is what I would call my oh shit alarm is I just go, oh no, like I got to remember that. And then I kind of jump in and will tell people it's not very structured. I tend to be very unstructured in kind of how I do that. So all this to say is I don't have a very good answer for you. I think what I will do, sometimes I will make calendar invites for myself. Like, hey, in 4 weeks or 4 months, follow up with this person because I'm always looking at my calendar and I'll see that little note. So it is something I do, but most of the time I rely just on my subconscious poking through and saying, hey, you forgot something. Follow up with this person. And that's for better or for worse is kind of what I do.
Calendar reminders. I block my calendar every single day with the things I need to remember to do. The other thing that I would call out is making sure that the workflow is integrated. Automation is as much as it's a crutch. I see a lot of our customers have success in making sure that research insights go into a product road mapping tool or into an IT ticketing tool, so then you can track what's actually implemented down the road. Not as helpful for stuff that's on the back burner, but one way to make sure that you're tracking who's interacted with it.
Hmm.
Okay. Amy, regarding distilling, if you have a super dense project with many stakeholders across domains or business areas, would you say your framework would recommend breaking it up into different reports, since
Hmm.
the main report or the single story might differ depending on the sub-audience?
Excuse me. Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we've been talking about a little bit with a few people on our team is, hey, if you've got different stories, different headlines for different audiences, absolutely, you can definitely do that. If it is really dense, I found when I was a researcher, I had so much more traction with those small little conversations and not necessarily like the big performance. As much as, I like that as the former orchestra conductor, I really found like the small, intimate like conversations that were tailored to different groups goes a long way. Especially because in those smaller formats, I find the pressure to create some deck that, looks amazing is much lower. I would usually not use a deck even in those smaller groups. I just have like a document and we talk about things. And again, format aside, I think definitely I would recommend that. If you don't have time for that or you can't do that, something you can also do is just be conscientious of calling out different groups through your share out.
Mm.
So, hey, we found this, customers had a hard time choosing a menu, an option in this dropdown. Design. Let's think about how we can make the design of this a little bit roomy and a little bit easier to visually parse. Product. Let's think about how we can, if there are any options in this dropdown that we can cut. Is there anything that is not relevant. So that'll help simplify it. So even as you're going, you're kind of tailoring the implications or the call outs to different people groups. So that's another thing you can try, even if it's like really dense. I would just make sure that like everybody that's at your share out has something that's important for them, and call them out so that they wake up and pay attention when it comes time to listen to that part.
That's awesome. I think part of your answer to that question is related to this one from Caitlin, but tweaked slightly. So Caitlin works on a team of two at a young company. Hi, welcome. We're the same person. And oftentimes our projects are intentionally broad because we have a lot to learn and limited time or people to do it. Talk to me, sister. Curious if anyone has tips about balancing some of these communication strategies with the headwinds that smaller teams face, like not being embedded in teams, constant context switching, time limitations, limited time to book with stakeholders, etc. So it sounds like,
Yeah.
how do we pare this down into the meat that'll be most impactful so that it's not overwhelming?
Totally. Well, I mean, be kind to yourself. Don't put undue pressure on yourself to give a TED talk every time that you do a presentation. I mean, researchers, yeah, at small companies, there's a lot of pressure on you. There's a lot. I mean, I feel like we need to go into like, you know, workflow management and less about communication, just because, yeah, I mean, just managing the sheer amount of requests you get can be mind-boggling, and I'm aware of that. I would say, yeah, where to start? I think going really lean on the fidelity of the output is probably where I would start. Like a lot of PMs that I work with, like a document's fine. I have a design background, so I love doing cool designs when I'm inspired, but like a document's fine. I mean, again, like going back to this point of like it's not about the communication, it's about making the difference. Um, your research impact could be just sharing that one insight in that one meeting to that one person that you didn't have to prepare for. You didn't prepare some big song and dance. You just heard the business decision or the conversation and you went, so just one thing we learned in research is blah, 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 blah. Like that is so powerful, so targeted, so timely to the moment where it's really relevant. So I would say like at a small company, it's a lot more about um, as much as you can, being involved in different conversations and finding lean ways to just tell people whatever way is simplest and least time consuming for you. And but also, yeah, I mean, if there is a way to advocate for spending a little bit more time in certain areas and hey, PM, like I'd love to be able to be in a few, meetings about X, Y, and Z subjects so that you don't just become like a vendor. Um, there's no easy answer, right? Your organization, and it sounds like you might be getting bounced around to a lot of different things, but that's kind of what I would say overall.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to merge two questions into one here, just with an eye on the time, and then save one. We've got a couple Maggies in the group today, so I'm going to save one Maggie question for in just a moment. A separate Maggie said that they've seen a lot of discourse around research as a vehicle for affirming versus learning. How do we
Hmm.
as researchers ensure that research is not just being used to affirm, but to make change? One side. And
Hmm.
then as a layer on top of that, Bryce is wondering, is there research on how to present research for maximal impact? He feels that Jesse's onto something, including something with including emotion. We're not robots.
Hmm.
And anything with emotional content is more stick. Thirdly,
Hmm.
to wrap this question up into a nice little present for you, Jess, Clark is saying it's all about the clips. Show customers
Hmm.
struggling directly to product leaders. So, can we
Yeah.
wrap that all into a couple sentences suggestion on how do we show that emotion to actually influence change as opposed to affirming, to Maggie's point?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I wish we had 30 more minutes to dig into that, but I'd say, concisely, yes. The point, the time to really be tuned into this like affirming versus making change is right at the beginning of the study. We're like, hey, we just want to, that was that in some ways was my like the study I did on LinkedIn referrals. We just kind of want to validate da, 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 da. When you hear that, like I have little warning bells that go off in my head. And so just know that at the beginning and reframe the questions from the beginning to really be about discovery and not just proving that you're right. Like we all know that that's not that's not going to get us where we want to go. So to me, it's about, affirming that it's starting at the beginning with redirecting those research goals and questions to make sure it's about, it is about discovery because you get to control the output here. You don't have to say, we validated that da 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 da. Like you can still keep an eye on the fact that we're trying to evaluate something. Now, on the emotion side, cannot agree more, and on the clip side, also cannot agree more. I think I heard one of our leaders say that empathy comes from proximity, and the closer you are to the thing and the person you need to empathize with, the better. So 110%, the clips showing to executives, yes, they need to see that. And seeing people actually use your product in those concise, little snippets, so important. And that does go a long way to getting the emotion. And you can also work that in as you deliver your insights. So I think the point about, we're not robots. Like if you were to be doing research for your city council on like the homelessness problem in your area, the data you found out might make you really fired up to change that, right? Data doesn't mean you're not passionate. Like it's such a weird disconnect to me. It's like data should impassion you. Is that the right word? Should drive you to want to make a change, right? If it doesn't, then is it actually impacting you? And it should. Right? Like, yes, you have to have those checks and balances, but don't be afraid. I mean, I also think like leaders want drama. Like leaders at least should. Like they want some kind of like, why does this matter? Like, what difference is this going to make? Like lighting some fires is okay, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Unbelievably, we're at an hour here. Maggie, I know you're the question that I'm going to have Jesse answer for us, and we'll post the answer on our LinkedIn later, if that's okay with you, Jesse. So Maggie, make sure that you've followed at least me, if not Great Question on LinkedIn, is how can research ops help with all of this? We'll make sure to get that answer posted on LinkedIn for all of you to see later. Since we're at time, you can find Jesse as well on LinkedIn, and he also has an excellent Medium article we'd recommend you check out more. It's called From Teacher to Change Bringer, How UX Research Communication is About Affecting Change. We'll paste these links in the chat. I think Carly's already done so, and we'll share the recording of this session out as well with all of you afterwards. Final call out. This is a slide of QR codes that refer us back to things with Great Question, which is where I work with people like you every single day. To close us out, Jesse, thank you so much for this. This was a beautiful conversation, and thank you for sharing so much of your valuable wisdom with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was amazing.
Awesome. Well, we'll chat again soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your week.
All right.